Did you get it? But when, yes. Okay.
All right, I'd like to call the meeting to order. It's August 24th, 2022, 6 o'clock. Any comments from the public before we start this? All right. Go to regular business. So 22-077 to hear a presentation from Wright Pierce on the Stone Wharf concept plan and take any necessary action. I'll hand this over to Jason.
Sure, it's okay with the board. I'd like to kind of join you at the table there and kind of walk through the presentation. We can do it that way. All right. So, first I wanted to say, great to see you all and thank you for your flexibility in meetings. I know the summer schedule has been a challenge, so really thankful that you're able to take the time to be able to move stuff around to accommodate. So the goal for tonight, from our standpoint, is to go through and review the revisions that went into the concept we presented at the end of June, and then develop this concept that we have now as of the end of July with the hope that we'll be able to go louder. Okay.
Just to make sure that you're
Sure. So with a hope that we've incorporated all the comments that we received through the public process so that we can effectively put closure on for evaluation of the facility and recommendations to be able to issue you a final report. So that, again, the purpose of this is to review the concept and make sure that we got it right based on the feedback that we received through the meetings that we had. So with that, I guess I'll kind of get into what changed in the final draft. So for folks' reference, we issued a memo last week and all the same information is posted on the town's website. So the biggest of the changes were that we increased the expansion into the intertidal zone. So we're talking about up in this area here to allow parking flow with the turning lane on the inside, drop off on the outside to be able to optimize flow through the facility. So what that did was it took what was a 3,500 about square foot plan impact in that area and bumped that out to about 8,900 square feet. So it, like I said, moves the drop-off lane to the outside and it minimizes, it's intended to minimize pedestrian vehicular conflicts. So with that, we have a wider circulation footprint because the turning movements or the turning radii of the vehicles, assuming that we're dealing with vehicles with trailers, need, or a single unit or bus, they need a wider circulation area. So that forced us to push out further. A side benefit to that is that we're able to get more parking on the inside of that than what we had in the prior concept. That may draw some scrutiny from the regulators, but what we're going to talk about there is that it isn't intended to increase capacity. It's really just a side benefit of that. And we're not overall we're maintaining the parking that's on the facility at this point now. So other than that, the other major change was that the plan added a commercial fishing pier off the south side that, and we can show how that works right now with the federal channel, but based on the comments we received, there really wasn't enough access for that working waterfront. We conceptualized an additional fixed pier there to be able to accommodate that, so you'd have mostly deep water access, larger working waterfront, that also has the purpose of avoiding conflicts with the barge ramp. So those were the biggest changes. We kept float B1 in here, and the same configuration for ferry landings. And then I'm going to flip to another sheet real quick here, just to kind of show the overlap with, excuse me just a second. So one of the pieces we wanted to talk about as far as this goes is, if, assuming that the town would like to move forward with a concept like this, we want to make sure that we're addressing this issue where we've got an encroachment on what the Corps has for their federal channel right now. So we're even, and we got this sort of, after we laid this out, we're able to get the information from the Corps. So want to make the point that it's not a final design. It's certainly a concept, a working concept. We know we need to add more space here. There's an opportunity to turn this, but there may also be an opportunity to talk with the Corps, depending upon where we are in the conclusion of the dredging process, to see if we can make some modifications out there to what their plan is. So our recommendation is to, otherwise we're not conflicting with what's going on there as far as the impacts to the channel with any of the proposed improvements, which is a positive there. And yeah, I think that summarizes those two major changes. Other things that we did based on some feedback, we reached out to Final Plant, we reached out to CTC and memorialized some of those discussions in the memo that we issued. And the basic summary there is that CTC doesn't need or hasn't suggested that they need an all-tide ramp, and Lionel Plant's largest barge, really that's shown here. So the footprint of that really isn't suitable for this location. So as they serve the island, they would be looking to maybe land at different locations with that ship. So any questions as far as those changes or how that's been described?
So, sorry, yes, I just have a question. So the barge ramp does not give you all tide boat launch access, is that right? You didn't like that?
Yeah, we wanted to keep it right at the edge of the federal channel. So it comes down to, yeah, it'll come out, I guess the short answer is no. It'll be similar to what, it's gonna be pushed out further, but similar to what you have now.
Yeah.
And by pushed out, you mean the alignment will be pushed out, not the actual ramp itself.
Right, because what we had talked about was initially taking that and having the head of the ramp at the edge of the pier. And it was a consensus comment that it'd be nice to have that slot to be able to line up on. So we then pushed that back into the facility, but because we're talking about raising it up and to maintain a proper 12 to 14% grade to go down, it would still extend out slightly, but it won't be out past the edge of the channel as it's been redefined.
So the barge ramp is getting a little bit
A
longer.
little bit longer, yeah.
Downhill.
Yep.
And a little bit longer at the uphill end as well.
Yes, correct. Yep.
And was it the barge captains that said they wanted the little alignment as far as pushing it back instead of having it.
We tried to maintain most of the foot, so I'll say it's a nominal change as far as it goes in, but yeah, we heard from folks that just lining that up on those sidewalls would be easier than if there were posts or stanchions there, and lining up on the face of here.
Excuse me, Jason. Please raise your hand and wait to be addressed.
All right, thank you.
So,
So
Yeah.
you talked to Matt Ridgway from CTC, and he's not here tonight because he's on vacation. I just want to confirm that he was okay with the new Fisherman's Wharf and being able to maneuver around that to the barge ramp.
We could circle back on that and ask that explicit question again, but showed the plan, talked through it.
I just want to
and-
make sure he
yeah.
saw the plan, and
Yep.
it wasn't clear in your notes that
Okay,
he was okay with that.
okay.
Jason,
Yes, I'm listening. I'm just gonna make a quick note.
make sure I understand correctly, the extension, extended barge ramp alignment, the arrow or the dot line points to the actual ramp, but the blue trapezoids on either side of it, is that an extension of the concrete on the sides of the ramp?
So those are going to, so part of that's slope fill
Okay,
to be able to make that grade touch down, because it's up a little higher. It's been dredged out there, so to touch it back down, that's a little bit of slope fill there.
Got it.
Stone, it's not intended to be concrete fill.
and it's subsurface.
Correct, so it'll be below the elevation of the ramp.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Yes,
I had
sir.
a question. Is there opportunity to put a water level float next to that fishing wharf, or is this kind of like the one stab at the, because I think that might be also useful in that area to load and unload at water level. And have a ladder to get up and down, and also lift would be great. And if you could balance that with the length, maybe you can
Right.
cut back to satisfy 2 or 3 other complaints.
Yeah,
Maybe
so-
make it slide easier through the passage with getting out of the channel, and maybe a soft float on the water next to it that can be pulled.
These are great, these are great comments. So we had considerations for that. What we also did is we left this float here, so we're net +1 on floats. There is an opportunity to, like you said, sure, add a float adjacent to this and reconfigure it. We want to see if general concept concurrence is that, yeah, we want to have an additional fixed pier resource, and then design around that. It's something that, because, when we presented the draft alternative and now we're sort of at final draft, we acknowledge that we haven't vetted that as much as other components, so it does need some work. And one of those key pieces of work is to make sure that we talk through it with the Corps and make sure we're on solid footing there before we go much further with it. So short answer, yes. That to me, if the community agrees that that's the direction we want to go, that to me is a preliminary design item that gets refined as we go.
Yeah, I think with the tide, you never double stack on either side, so the extra length is kind of lost. Like, I don't
So
think you
this is,
stack.
yeah, it is, okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah, you have
You wouldn't be
double-sided access, right, but yeah, we would be
So,
tandem.
so
Yep,
if it got out of the federal zone to
Right.
make more navigation room and to,
Yep.
provide the resource and then something next to it.
yeah, Barney and I talked about, do we have something that shoots off of here, or do we angle this and have another float that shoots off of there?
That'd be awesome. And you did add floats right to the other side. Yeah, it seems like there's.
Yeah,
A
there's-
lot more floats.
Yeah, we can overlay that, but the net configuration is +1, yeah. And it's over here. We maintain, well, we have 2 here, but one of these is there at the landing for the ferry to be able to accommodate. We assume that there's going to be additional accommodation for ADA accessibility on that first float. So we need the space to make that happen. And then, yes, there's an additional float added, at sort of the dinghy dock area. And they've also been moved out away from the wave screen slightly to afford more maneuverability between them and the wave screen. Mark?
Sorry if I missed this. Is that commercial fishing float concept at a pitch, at an angle? Because the concept of the drawing it to raise the wharf, I'll say 3 feet, maybe 4 feet. And one of the complaints we heard from the fishing industry was that would restrict their ability to use that. And so would that wharf be built at a pitch? to
It's
help
likely that
them?
we would do that. Yeah, we haven't marked that to that detail, but right, we would likely do that, or yes. Yeah, it could be stepped or pitched to accommodate that.
Mhm.
Sure.
Yeah, just so I understand what I'm looking at, this first figure, which proposed facility overview, final draft for alternative. I'm a little confused about the difference in the floats on that drawing versus the one with the Army Corps dredge, because like there's a float A that's not shown on the first figure and you show it on that figure that's up there,
So
so.
they should, from the initial draft alternative to the proposed draft, the floats should match up. If they're not all labeled, we'll pick up on that.
So
think there's
what I'm confused about on this, yeah, so they don't, there's an A1 and an A2, but the A2 is the only one that's blue. First
Oh,
of all,
that's a good point. That's a coloring thing. Yeah, I need. to
but
fix-
my
I just
question
saw
is,
that.
are these supposed to be both final alternative drawings? That's the first question.
So when you say both, which ones?
This top drawing, this drawing, the
This
first one,
here, yeah,
then we have the rendition,
the rendering is supposed to match,
right? And then the last one is the same as this.
right,
One.
with the core
Okay.
channel
Because they're
laid on
not,
top of it.
yeah, because it's not exactly the same, so that's
Yeah,
why.
I apologize. I just saw that too, actually. There's some CAD issue with that I need to fix. So we'll make sure that gets colored in properly.
Paul? Couple questions, Jason. The 40-foot fishing and deep water access pier with hoists. So you're providing for basically 2 40-foot boats there. And I think that's because we're giving up fisherman access space on the north side of the new stone pier, if you will. Is that correct? Was that the reason for that?
Thank you. That's a great clarification. You still get this access here, and we're specifically ramping down, but you get greater access. This was really intended to accommodate or compensate for loss of access along this space
Around this side.
here.
Okay.
Right. So, but this access would be maintained.
So that access is maintained on the north side.
Right.
On the south side, we're giving up access then to the pier.
Right, because we're raising this sort of queuing and stacking area for pedestrians.
Yeah.
And then that was one of the comments that we heard pretty loud and clear, that we need to still provide that similar access on the south side.
So another question, or a comment, you mentioned that we might run into regulator problems because we, in this final draft preferred alternative, have taken the number of parking spaces up a touch. But compared to existing, it's actually down, according to your chart. We've gone from,
Right.
ADA is the same on both of them, but the other parking has gone from 26 down to 23. According to the chart, so that should be a
Right.
positive.
Yeah, right. So between the two, so as part of our final report, we'll show the draft alternative and then the final alternative. And I just wanted to make that it's kind of a nuanced point, but yeah, we are reducing parking proper by a few spots. We intend to pick them up in the upland, but from a regulator standpoint, they may look at it and say, well, this least impactful build that you showed as your initial draft, you know, we got to verify that the appropriate alternatives have been analyzed to get to.
We can ask them to consider
Fine.
safety as part of it.
Exactly. So we focus on safety, we focus on flow and making sure that we can, because the initial draft was not preferred because of some of the conflicts with the, how people get dropped off and how the flow works, so.
When we get the final report, last question, when we get the final report, will some of these individual major elements be detailed out and how
Sure.
much estimated cost?
Yeah, yeah. So we, when you say detailed out, you mean just describe or like,
Like the extension of the barge ramp,
yeah,
that's approximately 500,000 or 3 million or whatever it is, those kind of high level details.
Right.
Excuse me.
yeah. So, and I can, work that out on a, in the narrative also, but part of what we prepared, in order to get to that total cost and is we have this sort of, this line item estimate, and it was intended that, so we can, add more description into the narrative that kind of hits these bigger picture pieces, and then still attach the estimate as an appendix. But then, that'll help to kind of see where the money's going. The big financial change was 2.5, so this additional expansion into the tidal resource, that's about $2.5 million based on the estimating that we've done. And then to add this fixed pier here's on the order of, I think it was $500,000 to $600,000
Yep.
on there. And that's how we get to the depth to delta there.
Great, thanks.
Sorry.
Sorry.
That's okay. Just for clarity, you said that both the captains of the barges did not see it necessary to have an extended ramp, but the plan does include that it's extended. It doesn't seem like it's extended on the one with the.
Yeah, that is
that right?
I apologize if it's confusing to look at, but that is and the same wharf configuration. It's just expanded. So I'll go back and show, I will, on this plan, show the edge where that federal channel is, so you'll be able to see the two. But it's the same ramp on both of them.
Okay.
Any other questions?
The drawing that is up there now, if I understand it correctly, it shows an encroachment to the east into the tidal zone.
Yes,
If I understand correctly, that there's constraints on how much you can encroach into a tidal zone?
of course. Not on there's not a physical limit on how much, and we haven't got to the point of what the encroachment is. And what I mean by that is it may be most cost effective to build that out of a fill material and then put a surface on top that is impervious and your drainage is collected and treated and moved to upland for treatment. As opposed to what we've shown or depicted on the rendering is a timber deck type structure, which has less impact, so less fees, less impact from that standpoint, but pure construction, if you were to just look at construction of a stone fill with a cap on it versus construction of a timber pier, it's likely that the timber would be more expensive. But when you add in the additional permitting costs and justification for those costs to do just a straight fill, likely to be more of a wash. So we need to vet that a little bit further. And that goes back to some of the discussions we had in February with DEP and the Corps. And it goes back to, when Colin Greenan from the Corps came out to one of the meetings here and kind of talked a little bit about that. So our goal would be next phase, as this firms up a little bit, we go through understanding this is the preferred overall footprint, Now we go in and do a sensitivity, or we do some detailed analysis on what's the least environmentally damaging, so highest probability for permitting, and what's the least cost for both construction and permitting, and overlay time on that.
I think I understand. Question I have is, if the town was so inclined, could it proceed to see about timber covering the entire cove for parking?
So that is a question that we asked directly to the Army Corps, and we tried to focus this project to not materially diminish parking on the pier, but also not to expand it, because it's been pretty clearly stated that parking is not a marine dependent use. Therefore, it's not necessarily easy to permit that without an extensive alternatives analysis to show that there's nowhere else to park to be able to serve this facility. So we've tried to stick to safety, flow of traffic.
I understand. Is there any indication the cost of the permitting process to extend the parking lot?
The indication we got was that it's highly unlikely that it would be permittable, or highly unlikely to permit parking over the tidal resource on its own. So we didn't go
The
there.
gentleman at the last meeting suggested that one of the regulatory authorities suggested they would be willing to approve that. Maybe I'm missing the thread, but I thought that was asserted.
So it was, he wanted us to go more towards safety, pedestrian and traffic flow. And we'd be more apt to get a permit for that. If we put in a permit just for, say, increased parking down at the stone, he's like, most likely we're not gonna get the permit. Or it's gonna be a real big fight to get the permit. So he basically steered us, go for the safety route and the pedestrian plus the traffic flow, and you're more apt to get, you know.
Perhaps after the meeting, you could share with me the regulatory authority for that and the statutory authority. I'd be kind of interested in looking at it.
Sure, I can develop that.
That'd be great.
Any other questions? Yes.
I like the concept and the pitch too. I mean, you're creating a big space and you're parking in it, and that's the best use of that. And it will be in your mind too. So I just wonder if you could extend it just a little bit more, right at where everything congested to the 2-lane in the
here.
Yeah, it's like that's the last triangle, like, you know, you took 5,000 square feet, take the last 50 square feet to really drive that home. And I think piling those bikes or mopeds or whatever right on that node is probably not a great idea either. If that could slide.
Yeah, we've moved them around a few times.
Where does everything go, right?
Right.
But I think somewhere down here by the shed, because I think that's where people are heading to wait to get on a boat, so. I don't know.
Some of that bike scooters type, we've been careful to make sure that we keep that on the facility to accommodate those uses, acknowledging that it's likely going to move to best fit the uses once we get to the final piece. So yeah, thanks. Eric.
I was, can you refresh my memory, because there's no elevation drawings with this, so looking at sort of the southeast corner, or southern corner here, so basically the barge ramp, the fisherman's pier, and the golf tee, and the park, the spaces, is that all at the same elevation, or is there some change in elevation?
So there's some flexibility in that. However, what we've shown right now is that this entire area to get to here is likely at the same elevation. And then there's a ramp down here to maintain the existing elevation here. The reason that these two are colored similarly is that, and it's implied, I know it's working waterfront, but there's an opportunity that this could be walled off here with the pedestrian access and the golf tee. There could be a ramp down to that, so that there is an opportunity, like we were talking a minute ago about either ramping this down or keeping this low and ramping part of this down and having a wall here so that the green area stays up higher. But at minimum, you would have all of this area here would be up higher, it could ramp down here, and then it's shown to ramp down here. So for now, we've assumed that everything to the southeast of here is at the same elevation, but there's still some discussion that can be had there.
So the parking and the golf tee are at the same elevation.
Yeah, yeah, right, because, and that's part of, because there's parking there now, so we didn't want to have, if that is intended to be used all the time, we didn't want to drop the elevation of that and have those cars underwater while, ostensibly underwater while these cars are not.
The same elevation as it is now.
I recollect, but I recollect that in an earlier.
In an earlier drawing, we had left the golf tee down.
Yeah.
And there was either a ramp right down to it, but then for simplicity, understanding that we were gonna look at probably a facility here with hoists, keep it all at the same elevation.
Okay, so you did change the elevation of the golf tee, which was previously the lower elevation, because there was a ramp down to the golf.
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
Just making sure I understand correctly. And
Well,
just,
yeah, and I'm not sure that, I gotta look, did that change? Some-
Yeah.
It did, yes,
Yeah.
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 Because there were people that were very
right, and I was in
outspoken
that.
about not liking the ramping down to the golf.
Right,
Right.
and that's, I was in that group, so that's why I'm asking. And then the other kind of, it's kind of late in the game to ask this question, but why, I'm just curious why we wouldn't just have pedestrian access that, this outer loop that goes out into the cove. And then we have pedestrian access that goes through the parking area and then down to the kind of waiting area and down to the floats. I'm just picturing the average Islander is gonna cut across and take the shortest route and just go the simplest way. And so I'm just wondering why we also have this exterior access, and if you couldn't get by with just the central access.
So the great point. So the intent with that exterior access is to allow stacking outside of here. So the yellow, the brighter yellow area is intended to be through. The gray hatched area is intended to be pull off, get out, take your stuff, or wait and then load your, so this is
You're
pedestrian.
saying that's an unloading zone?
Yes, in addition to here, pick up and drop off here, but stacking here as well. So at boat time, people would stack up there and be able to load up and then not interfere. The intent is to the extent possible, not interfere with through loop traffic to clear the area.
So is there, I guess I can see
This
that.
is that sort of airport concept we were talking about.
Yeah.
Is it okay if I ask a question on the fishing?
Yes.
So the thought just occurred to me, what we're doing here, the question I have is, when you're using that new fisherman deep water access point in the spring and in the fall to move traps, would your driving with trailers and unloading of traps be more concentrated at high tide? Or would you be messing around with trailers and traps at low tide and then loading the boats at high tide? The reason I'm asking is if it's at high tide, then we're gonna have pickups and trailers there at the same time that barges are unloading. That seems like a pinch point.
I think probably less so than it currently is. I think either way is probably a better setup than what there is now, whether you're moving at high tide or low tide.
Well, if you're moving your trucks and trailers around at high tide and somebody was unloading the bar, isn't that gonna be more congestion than just having one of those activities?
Yeah, but that's what there is now.
Yeah.
Sort of what we heard in one of the groups when we were talking about this too, is that maybe there's 2 trips, maybe there's, you go stack your gear down there, and then your trucks and trailers are out, that just doesn't happen at boat time. To minimize that conflict, so that's gonna be part of just, I think, how people get along with the facility.
Jason, I realize we're still kind of in the, late concept design section here, but the first picture that you had up when we came in,
Yeah.
I'll put that back.
it's safe to say that you said, I think, this is the most impactful on the project zone.
It's more impactful than the previous one, right? We had, we went from 3,500 square feet of impact in this area up to 8,900, so right, yeah.
And can you just draw for me, because I can't seem to picture, if a vehicle is coming down the Stonewall Road, where they would drive in this concept?
So they would go in the road, they'd come out and loop around and then head out that way. So sort of in the figure, it's on the yellow path, the bright yellow path.
So is it a sharper turning radius down at the bottom where you kind of loop back up?
No, we actually made that, and that's part of the reason why we had to expand, because we made that a broader turning radius, because we used to have it so that the drop off was on the inside, and then we expanded that to make the drop off on the outside.
Okay,
So you know, this is the same, that's the same drawing, just a different viewpoint of it.
yeah, I just can't, I couldn't quite. You know, it must be a CAD thing that I'm not used to, or something looking at. And then one more question. I realize we're way far away from even thinking about building or going for a permit for this, either one of these drawings. But are these 2 surfaces in these concepts designed to be pavement and concrete at the perimeter with a slight pitch?
The cost estimating that we've done assumes that, yes, that's why we colored it that way, is it so that you have a working surface similar to what exists now. And yes, there'd be a concrete curb on the outside because we need to add curbing. And then there'd be a pedestrian rail where the pedestrian areas are.
And that would be raised.
The curbing would have a slight raise to it, like a 10-inch curb. The pedestrian rail would be a standard 42-inch high pedestrian guard.
The purpose for my question is winter maintenance.
Right, so what we would do is, on the curved piece, we would put scuppers in so that it is drains, but yeah, they would effectively, from a winter maintenance standpoint, there's guards or there's curbs we can put in with the, even with the pedestrian rail. Like if you think about at Cousins, they've got what's effectively a bridge rail over there, serves as their pedestrian rail. It's that steel rail. So that's a DOT bridge rail. So we probably wouldn't do something like that, but we could have a slightly elevated concrete curb that you could plow or maintain up against, and it would have scuppers on it so that stuff clears out of there. But you wouldn't be, not that rails never get hit, but you'd have a good chance of plowing that edge without without using the rail as a guide for the plow.
Yeah, again, this is jumping ahead, and I'll be quick. But one problem we have occasionally over at Cousins Island is trying to get that sidewalk maintained.
Yep.
It's an extra maintenance stuff.
So the goal here that sidewalk is up a little higher than the roadway, so you need different equipment. So our goal with this is, from a surface standpoint, it's all at the same elevation. It's just that you've got a guard on the edge as opposed to what you have now.
Oh, I see. Thank you.
Yep.
I realize that from the start, we've all had concerns about the FEMA flood designation on the wharf, and the town may choose to move forward at some time for a letter of that revision. But in order for you folks to complete your task at hand, listening to the questions, comments, or confusion about elevations and the lack of profile drawings in this. At some point, to complete a rough order of magnitude estimate for construction, you had to pick an elevation, correct?
Yes,
So could that be depicted on your next set of renderings, please? Because I'm not concerned about sidewalks, but I hear talk of ramps, existing elevation, and things that are gonna stay the same and things that are gonna go up in the air. And I think it'd be very helpful for everybody here. If you pick 12 feet, put it down. Okay?
Yeah.
13 feet, whatever your number was, because that then ties back into every dog,
correct.
right? It really doesn't matter what FEMA says right now, because we all assume the town may pursue that. But to get a handle on this concept and to go through all these iterations without a sense of the elevations on the drawing, to me, it's a big gap for everybody.
Yeah, I have two quick questions. One actually is about the elevation, and what did you assume the elevation would be in this?
For the purposes of drawing it up, we added 5 feet to it, so we put it at 13.
Okay, so then my next question is about the pedestrian way going down through the parking lot in the middle of the wharf. And how do cars get in and out? If you drive into those parking spaces, that means you're backing out into the, am I right?
That's correct, yeah. So they are, they could be adjusted to be angled in to make backing a little easier, but yes, they are perpendicular drive in or drive by, back in, and then drive out. So that is a potential challenge there, but the thinking there is that we put spaces, and we're assuming that those would be spaces that, depending upon who parks there and how long they park there, you know, people would know that once you're there, you're sort of in, not that you're locked in, but those aren't sort of quick in and out spots. But with the limited space we have, we're trying to provide close to the existing parking that exists now.
If I could, I just want to say that I have great respect for Jason and his team. I think they have done a great job working with the town, and I think they have done everything that we've asked them to do. When I was on the select board, I urged the board of selectmen to hire an engineer to begin the process to evaluate the stability of the wharf, because that was really the question that kept coming up, is the wharf gonna fall over? And that was based on the non-binding referendum that urged the town to explore the options for improvements to the stone wall rather than to look into more detail at a new facility at Sunset. I believe that the town, working with Wright Pierce, did this. They proved that the wharf is not going to fall over, and that it's stable, and that raising it for fishing access wasn't necessary. Because the fishermen, I think, were very clear that as much as we raised it, it was going to be difficult for them. And so that's why I think a lot of these modifications have had to happen. While Wright Pierce has attempted to solve as many issues as possible, we gave them a 60 by 20 canvas and asked them to create a mural. And, you know, if you think about that analogy, that's really what we've done. And I think they've done a great job in what they've tried to do. And while this plan aims to meet as many needs as possible, the facility still doesn't meet the needs of the community for the next 50 years. And that was one of the goals. And it isn't Wright Pierce's fault, but the vast majority of this island have no interest in stable satellite parking or bus. When you ask people, they don't want to do either one of those. Nor do members of the community want a priority parking system unless they qualify for being the priority. I have a lot of friends and we've had a lot of these discussions, and they come up with all these plans and they always get a parking spot. I don't know if any of the rest of you have heard this or not, but this plan really doesn't solve the all-time barging issues of the island. Because we still have the problems at Bennett's, and I think they did a great job of reaching out to Coley and reaching out to CTC, but that's still another issue. And the cost of this project, no matter who pays for it, doesn't serve the island's needs for the next 50 years regarding parking, barging, safety, et cetera. So I think that this cost, coupled with the limitations of the site, parking, barging issues, are reasons enough to revisit the creation of a new facility that would, at Sunset, that would meet the community's needs for the next 50 years. I mean, I think it's something, and I have to be honest, I'm not going to belabor it, I'm not gonna, but I just think that somebody's got to say it, because if we're really honest with the people in this community, you know, Rockies has done a great job. We all loved working with them. They were very responsive to everything that we asked them to do. But can we, in all honesty, say that this really is going to meet the needs of this community? And I don't want to get any big going, I just feel I have to say that. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, any other questions? Eric?
I hate to get into the nitty-gritty, but just so I understand it, on the last appendix C, where you have the costs, you know, what Bob was sort of asking about in terms of the cost breakdown.
Yep.
So for example, the big chunk of change, of course, is the sort of the intertidal expansion, and I don't understand the numbers I'm seeing to the left here, and then you have what looks like square feet, and then it's 250 PSF.
Yep.
So, and working waterfront, so can you explain, you know, primarily that's the area I'm kind of
Sure.
interested in.
So under the row called stone pier improvements,
Yeah.
there's a area where we talk about intertidal expansion, raised areas in the footprint, the finger pier, and an allowance for utilities. So that intertidal expansion, what that means is that we have costed this out, assuming for the purposes of understanding a high budget to go to funding with what we understand to be the most easily permitted type of structure. So that would be a pile supported timber deck. And what the 90 PSF and the 250 PSF mean are that there's one section that doesn't, basically pedestrian walkway only needs to support 90 PSF is what that means, because it's a lighter load than your 250 pounds per square foot loading that you have for general use. So what we did there was we calculated how much area for each one of those, and then we assigned a unit cost, and because of some of the amenities that are associated with a pedestrian walkway, you know, we're talking about railing, we're talking about maybe a slightly different walking surface. We've estimated the cost of that on a square foot basis, just say it's square foot of deck area at $600 per square foot, and then for the sort of the traffic area, we're estimating that at $500 a square foot. And then I think, so what?
So can I
then
just
it's
stop you there on the
yeah.
file supported one? Why is there no value in the
Right, so then what we did was, because I think we had so what you don't see here is another set of columns, is that for the other alternative, I believe we put quantities in there separately. So that quantity is 0. So basically what we're saying is that we've applied a similar, for the purposes of costing, we took all that square footage and just put it in at a 250 pound per square foot deck area.
So you're basically saying the 8,900 square feet
Right.
includes the pedestrian walkway.
Yeah,
And you're building it to the same construction specs as the truck loading area.
correct.
Is that what you're saying?
Yes, and that would give you, right, so it gives you more flexibility there, so. Concept level estimating.
If we're planning to plow that area.
Right.
kind of
I
need
just,
it to be
yeah,
truckload.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to understand the numbers. What is the 8, 310 and 2480? Under, next to the pile supported pedestrian walkway, are those other costs or what is that?
Those are,
And then, you know. and
8 times 310 is 2480.
yeah, And then so
And that
basically
is
we're
the square footage?
we're
8
doing,
feet wide.
so we're doing, 8 feet wide, 310 feet long, it's 240, right, 2480. But what we did is we zeroed that out and just, I could have cleaned this up probably a little bit more
Yeah.
as part of the answer.
In the final
So
report. it
I'll
would be
make
good
sure I
to-
clean that up.
To identify what those columns are, because it's confusing, some of them are filled out, some of them aren't.
Okay,
You know, I just couldn't. And then from your perspective, just scanning through this, the most expensive, so basically the expansion out into the intertidal area is a big chunk of change.
right.
The RC perimeter cap, can you describe that, what that involves? So I didn't quite understand, reading this, I don't know what that means.
Oh, okay, yeah, so we'll circle back on that. So in our draft, and I'm really thankful for all the participation also, because, we started with a different town administrator, we've gone through another select board. So, we started off and looked at how we would reinforce the existing facility and determined that due to the geotechnical stability, which is fine as it is, and the structural stability, which is fine as it is, if it was only modifying the structure, we can do that because of the way it's built. So it's an internally stable facility. We wouldn't have to modify it based on how the stone wharf is physically constructed. However, when we add elevation to it, because of its construction partially on rock, partially on timber crib, partially on piles, we need to reinforce that. So there was a discussion early on, and I think the draft interim final report, and we'll touch on it again, talks about installing a perimeter reinforcement with what's called micro piles. So they're drilled in cased piles on a 8 to 10 foot or so spacing that reinforce the perimeter as a wall. And then you cap that with concrete, similar to the concrete, I guess I'll call it a bulkhead that's there now up top where the ferry, floats or so that you've got that bulkhead section that takes those berthing loads from the ferry when it lands. So what we're talking about is to get stability of the structure for a 75-year design life, to when it gets raised, elevation to be determined, that we would do a perimeter strengthening of that, and then cap it with concrete, and then fill it with stone, and then pave over that.
Okay, I'm following you there. So the mini piles, is that is the actual physical piles, and then
Right.
this is the construction.
Steel piles that get
Steel,
grouted in.
paving, then RC slab is the slab between the perimeter cap, is that what that is? 'Cause
Yeah.
That's almost $1 million.
Yeah,
So that's basically the cap over the whole area that is concrete, and then paved.
well, just around the perimeter.
So the perimeter, there's the RC perimeter cap, that doesn't include the slab.
Yeah, we had, so RCs, so there are, I can break the quantities down more, but there are gonna be some areas where we're gonna recommend a slab and some areas we're gonna recommend just filling in, so.
So basically, sort of, to put it in simple terms, just so I kind of understand this raised areas and existing footprint, this is basically, bringing it up to an elevation, and you say you use 5 feet for this?
Yes,
And then so the cost, is basically a couple $1 million to take the existing footprint and bring that up, right?
right.
And, what's the word,
Hard
Right.
yeah.
stabilize it. So,
Yeah.
okay, so basically, I just wanted to understand what that meant. And then, I think that's the only other thing the rest of them are, and then the working waterfront pier is, that cost represents the entire cost to construct the fisherman's pier that was shown in red here.
Correct, that Yeah, peak water access, timber pier. So we had other work that was proposed previously, and then we added that to this, yes.
Two things. One, Bo, you mentioned, when we were talking about the difference in basically PSI strength or PSI capabilities of the walkway, the parking area, you mentioned we're gonna have to plow that with a truck. I don't think we'll be able to plow any of that walkway with a truck because it's gonna be divided. So the pedestrian walkway is gonna have to be plowed with a snow blower or a motorized snow blower or a tractor with a snow blower, but it won't be a pickup truck, I don't think. Just to point that out. 'Cause it
I'm
is-
sorry, I was under the impression that it would be, the walkway would be at the same elevation as the road, which was,
If I could clarify that, and I apologize, I didn't mean to misstate that. So yes, in this area up in here, however, when we're talking about along the finger, then that, there's just the walkway would be elevated, and yes, it would have rails sort of on both sides. So there is that run down here that wouldn't be wide enough for a truck probably.
So the area in the upper yellow, the new infill.
This is all the same elevation, yeah?
So on the one hand, we're saying the pedestrian walkway only needs to be 90 PSF. But on the other hand, we're saying it's gonna be clear so we can drive a truck over it. Is that what I'm hearing?
So couple things. So we left some line items in there that I'll clean up, because like what I didn't show you was the comparative, we summarized it, but I didn't, this is an estimate that has a comparative analysis between the two alternatives, and maybe for the final, I will show that, so you can see how that correlates. But generally speaking, right, if you were building just a pedestrian facility, then 90 PSF. If you're building a vehicular facility, more. And we summarized, we took the quantity value out for the pet facility piece here.
So that explains why it's all costed out as the higher.
Right, it's all costed out, because you get into sort of efficiencies of construction, they're not gonna, for this short piece around the side or narrow,
Change the concrete
yeah, they're not
material.
gonna change that,
Yeah.
right?
Then the other question I had, I thought at an earlier concept, we were talking about using something like bridge decking to raise the stone pier. But I think I just heard you say the infill was gonna be stone.
So on the exterior, and I apologize, I didn't bring the cross section, so we're talking about, there was an option where we could just deck over the whole thing. And then you'd effectively have a void between, that and what was underneath.
Yeah.
But from a construction standpoint, that's gonna be more costly. So if we're able to improve the current infill so that it doesn't have the heaving and the settlement, it's not settlement, but it is localized settlement and some heaving. If we can improve that, improve the drainage through the stone wharf itself to allow it to be more free draining, we feel pretty strongly that it's more cost effective to fill that in with trap rock, stone, riprap, and then pave over that. And that will be, you can, over time, it will require maintenance, and that will have to get repaved. However, the perimeter would be hardened with concrete, so it's effectively like building sort of like a bathtub and then filling it in with stone.
And
Yeah,
decking over that with concrete or
paving, yeah.
got it.
On that same page, on the project total is around $11 million.
Yes.
And then the next number, 12% of that contingency.
So that actually, that isn't called out on there, but that's a budget that you probably want to set for design of the whole facility. And then the next 30% is contingency.
Thank you.
So in the final report, oops, sorry.
Okay.
Okay, in the final report, you'll identify what those are on this table, because I'm finding it a little hard to follow.
We will, yes.
So related to that, if the 30% is the contingency, I think that adds up to the 15.7. How do you get to the 18?
Trying to project to when we think the soonest this could be done, 2024.
Okay, so overall inflation,
Sir, yeah.
cost
Yeah,
increase.
which is, as we all know, a painful subject and has been continuously hard to nail down, so.
So, utility lines, is it fair to envision that there won't be any overhead power lines anywhere that would interfere with launching the sailboat with the mast up?
So to me, that's a final design detail and it's pretty straightforward underground power. So if the community wants to underground power, it's easily accommodated.
For our electric ferry.
Well, there was talk about electric cars
And
and all
electric
that,
ferry.
so, yeah, that's a detail later on.
Any other questions? Yes, no.
Oh,
Yeah, sorry. Gentleman behind you.
You referenced the Corps of Engineers many times tonight. Which way should you talking about, the local, regional, or Washington? Because Washington has the final say on what the local agrees to. Many times in my 15, 16 years experience working with the Corps, Washington never agreed to it.
Right, so we deal with the state of Maine, and then we deal with Region 1, and in my experience, those folks are gonna guide us in a way that we're not gonna get overturned by a higher authority. It's not in their, I think, or our interest to lead anyone down a path to a project that can't get permitted. So that's why we were pretty sensitive in the early phases of this and reaching out to them to get the news, good, bad, or indifferent, on what we can expect. And I think we have heard a pretty consistent message from the Corps. We have heard consistent message from DEP on this. It is a permittable project. There will be constraints. They've said to us that until they see an application, they're not going to formally comment on that, but they've been consistent in the guidance that they've provided. And we've tried to work on your behalf to make sure that we're pushing a project forward with design intent that is permittable.
Okay.
A couple of requests for clarification. And the first one is, how do you envision the overall process moving forward? You know, what action do you see, if any, being taken tonight? And then what will be the municipal approval process, if there is any? And so, you want me to ask another question right now, or just purely that?
So I think tonight we're looking to approve this design and to end his current contract as far as, the drawing and what we asked him to do. And then we can work on getting the little tweaks that, and I think moving forward, now he's got a plan that he can go to FEMA and approach them, to ask them, about the flood height and stuff. It's probably on this.
Yeah, so I can add a little color to that. So, right, our goal for this discussion is to get concurrence from the select board that we've engaged the community, taken the community's comments into consideration, and reported out a concept that can, as Bo said, sort of put the finish to the current work. And then there are follow-on phases that the town would look to entertain. And the FEMA piece does play into what the elevation is going to be for the structure. So we've made assumptions on that height to be able to set a working budget. And our recommendation is this concept based on what we've heard. And we'd like to be able to issue the town a final report, and with that, we would outline some next steps to be able to execute part of the scope that was the subject of the harbor, the harbor grant that we got earlier this year. And then there are considerations that the town has to make for the biggest picture, which is how this project goes forward from a funding standpoint and capturing those funds, and how it goes forward from, we haven't been part of, but we've been cognizant that there is another close by project that deals with parking. We've made a recommendation that from a overall project standpoint, when you're talking about funding, that should be looked at holistically. That's how the regulators are going to want to look at it. They're not going to want to see two different projects. So, but those are decisions that the town has to make as far as how to move forward with those next steps. If the town wants to move forward for federal grants and move forward for 2024 construction, the time to do that is for this coming winter, to be able to get on the list in 2023 for 2024 funding. So that we feel as though we've heard the community, and we feel as though the community has developed great momentum on this project. And if the community wants to move forward, timing is good to continue to press on.
A related question is, will you foresee down the road that the town will be asked at a town meeting to appropriate additional money?
They have to.
We have to, for
You would have to,
anything.
you would have to go to.
That's
town.
what I surmised.
Yeah.
And on the diagram, the stacking lane. Am I imagining that it will merge with the yellow? You know, we have the yellow oval. And will the stacking lane merge like kind of in the bottom left of the yellow oval?
So the intent of the stacking lane is that all of it would merge in. It wouldn't. So again, thinking a little bit or imagining the airport concept, if you pull in and drop a passenger off, you pull back into traffic as soon as you can carefully. You don't continue on that lane until a point. So the intent would be sort of that's active loading, stacking at boat time, without a specific merge here area.
Most of you know my sentiments about barging defense codes, so I won't belabor anything. Suffice to say that I agree with Donna that the current situation can't be sustained. The town has, I'll say in Vika's letter to me, acknowledged the dangers, the level of risk, and I was kind of surprised by that. This morning, the 4 barges were in and out all morning for over 3 hours. It wasn't as much of a chaotic, well, I was over by the level, so I couldn't really see whether it was terribly chaotic. It wasn't as chaotic as the pictures I've circulated. But you all know what the situation is down there. I can't see it being sustained.
Yeah, you guys, I mean, you know my level of feeling about the risks on the entire. Yeah.
Thank you. Bob? So Jason, are you saying that to issue the final report, that you need the FEMA study first?
No. No, we're saying that that's a next step.
A question, wouldn't it have made more sense to get the FEMA report before developing this proposal?
No, it could be done either way. However, it was determined that the most effective way to pursue this was to agree on what the plan looks like. And by plan, I mean, looking down at it from an airplane, how does this function? Because once there's agreement on that, it's easy to determine what elevation it's at. And the two can run on a parallel path. And further, because FEMA is in a spot where they've issued a preliminary map and haven't issued final maps, and there's question as to whether how they're dealing with letters of map revision, it was determined that we could build community consensus on a concept plan and get that to be something that we checked off and then do that next piece. The other part of it was that, yes, we were successful as a team in getting that grant, but those grant monies aren't available until September, so we didn't really have access to them.
So where is FEMA now in terms of their response to these letters and requests for change? Get a sense of that?
We haven't started that process, so.
I'm not talking about ours, I'm talking about their general. So FEMA's last round of maps resulted in a whole lot of complaints on a fairly global
Correct.
basis.
And they
You know
have,
where FEMA is.
yeah, so they haven't issued, what they've said is they're not taking letters of map revision right now. So, and the answer is, they've said they can issue the maps as final at any time, and we don't have concurrence from them as to what any time means. So, yeah, I apologize, that's not a very easy answer.
Not something you can do.
Okay. Any other questions? Got any other comments, Jason?
Just thank you for all of the input and the teamwork that went into getting us to where we are. So it's been exciting and I think fruitful. So thank you to the community.
I just want him to comment on one thing in terms of if you accept this concept plan with the next steps going forward, one of them being that you had talked about going out and looking for grants that for the benefit of the town, of us putting out to bid for that next process in our benefit for receiving the most amount of grants and then potentially what we could receive for grants. I think that maybe, will you touch on that briefly?
Yeah, I can speak to the grant piece. So right now, there's a small grant. It's a $50,000 or $49,000, $47,000 grant that's been achieved through the state of Maine with a $25,000 match on behalf of the county. So that happened this spring. It's been posted on the website. So that helps to kind of defray some of the costs as the town continues to move forward. There aren't strings attached to that like some of the bigger grants. So what I'm talking about is that larger grants like you might have seen in the Press Herald yesterday or maybe the day before, Sanford got a $25 million grant. I've been talking to you from time to time about the $19 million grant that Lubeck got. So there's a series of federal grants, either through congressional directed spending, so earmarks, or through DOT raise grants. The bigger grants are the DOT grants right now, but we are seing that the congressional directed spending grants are approaching significant value that would tackle a project like this. We're also, NOAA is another source for these grants. The issue with those grants is that they will not reimburse the community for any funds that were expended prior to that grant being issued. So our recommendation to the community is to, if we're agreeable with this concept, to be able to issue a final report based on it, and then the community would go out for qualifications-based selection for the next phase of design development, so that the qualifications-based selection is how the DOT selects their consultants when there's federal funding involved. So there's this thing called the Brooks Act, where professional services need to be competitively, or they need to be solicited and selected on quality, not on price. So we would recommend that the town would go out to a request for qualifications, make a selection of their design team to go forward, and that would optimize, and with that, in that RFQ, it would be to assist the town in procuring those grant services as well. So there's CFR 200 federal regulations that talk about how you go through this process. So I could provide some of that detail to the board, or to be to provide to the board, so that you could go out to RFQ and then optimize or not jeopardize your future funding for this project. You know, we're trying to make sure that we don't get in the way of capturing more funding. Certainly, I will say, you know, we do want to continue to support you, but we also, it's more important that you get optimum funding for this project. So our recommendation is to issue a report, pause, let you decide how you want to select services for the next round, and then go forward. And that process, depending upon how the community does it, doesn't have to be a long process, and you can still be set up for the next round of funding. So it's to get set up for April, May of 2023 for funds that are available either end of the federal fiscal year 2023, so October 1, or if there's a continuing resolution like there was this year and most years, then it's usually March when those funds come available. So it'd be 2024 availability. And that would be a process of you go out for RFQ, you select your team, and then you go right toward preliminary design, assuming that the community wants this to be the facility, and you work the permitting in parallel with the funding, and you don't have to have the permitting done to get the funding, but you've got to get it all done by the time the funding is ready, so you can go to construction. So that's an overview of that. I hope that's helpful.
And the goal is that we could get grants to cover 80%.
Yeah, up to
Up to 70-80% of this nice $18 million cost.
So is it possible that you could send us a type of list or time frame that you think that would be, you know, optimized, you know, faster?
Yep, we can put that together for you. Yep.
Yes.
I'm Phyllis Brunner. Jason's describing the process exactly as it played out for Ocean Gateway in Portland 20 years ago. As far as the amount of money that came from the state DOT and from the feds was tremendous and covered that project very well. You could even go out with your RFP for a consultant team and have changes made at that time. I mean, what Jason's putting forward is a conceptual plan that gets another team started well, but you could do some of the nuancing that you talked about tonight in that next step. But
Correct. You're not locked in. That's a great point. Yeah.
you're not locked in to exactly what you're planning to do tonight. You could make some of these other changes that you're talking about with another team, but he sets it up well, and I would say you could qualify for a lot of money at the state level and at the federal level.
And it would be in the next step that the stone Wharf Road and all the other pieces would get blended into one.
So it's a very nice baseline start for that process.
Thank you. Can we get that in writing?
Yeah.
Engineers don't use that word. But because of this community and where you stand, and because of what's happening in Maine, because of the infrastructure bills and whatever, it's a prime project.
Mark?
Couple of very quick, late possibly questions, so excuse me. Obviously, in this concept plan, it does nothing to address the existing breakwater physically itself.
Correct. We showed it for context. It is like other upland elements, not part of the project proper.
Okay,
It could be rolled in.
Yeah.
But it's not as of now. It's
Right.
just maintained in its existing configuration.
yeah, that was my question. And one more, it does show the needed, what would be a needed ramp from a 4 or 5 foot pickup down to the existing end that is not proposed to be picked up. But my question is there certainly some plans in this concept to at least resurface the end of the pier a little bit?
Yeah, the intent there is that it would probably be picked up less than a foot just to allow proper drainage. And it would be hardened around the entirety of the, so that the concrete cap would be built in around, you know, it'd have a different thickness, but we're not raising it. But the intent would be that the piles that we're talking about reinforcing the perimeter with would be installed around around the finger also.
Yeah.
The thinking there is that you have what's called an adaptive design, so that, you know, this facility's been, 1830s it started, 1880s in its current configuration or so. So 100 years from now, if it wants to be modified again, it can simply be built up. Or frankly, if it's decided through final design that you're not going to raise it to the extent that we've been talking about now, but in 30 years, it gets raised again, you won't have to do that additional foundation support. So that's the thinking there.
Yeah, one of my reasons for that question is from where you get off the ferry right now, there's definitely some sagging and issues going on there with the fill below.
Yes.
Likely.
Yes, we've observed that.
Yes.
Well, one of the thoughts I have, and I'm not a registered voter here in Sheffield, but when I look at the transportation avenues that are coming to the island, to me, there are some that are underused and there are some that are overused. Has the board and the community considered a comprehensive look at how you get on the island, how you get off the island? Because I'm seeing it over at Bennett's Cove. I think it's underutilized at Chandler's. What's the potential at Sunset Landing? How could you use the stone pier differently? Has the town considered looking at all the pieces? Just a question.
I can't remember if we did the whole thing. I think there's always been talk about it.
I don't think
Don't
it's
know.
hard to do, but just for consideration, that's not to derail what's going on tonight. I bet it could be part of, just look at the whole thing.
But as far as having one facility, is that what you're?
I don't think it's, my comment is not meant to derail what they're trying to figure out tonight, but I think some of the comments that were made this evening don't have to do with stone pier, they have to do with how everything else is functioning.
Yeah.
Could you have a comprehensive plan looking at all the other avenues that are coming and going? Because it's crazy over that code. And it's quiet, Chandler's code. And it's crazy over here, and there's nothing going on.
There
It just seems
was,
like an imbalance.
there was a town vote to determine whether to focus on Sunset or the Stone Pier, and the Stone Pier is what moved it forward. So there was that did go to town vote a few years ago.
No, just, if you look at the Collins report too, because that compares Sunset and the Stone Pier. So focus has been there, and I have to say, I have you know, had to go through the Bennett's code. But as someone that has lived in the center and grown up here on the island, I can go sit on my porch and tell you that it's not safe there at times too. It's very busy in the summer, and it is. Well, I'd like to invite you up. There you go.
All right.
I'm gonna start.
I would just like to respond to all three of those comments and offer a note of support for looking at those contextual issues and beyond those contextual issues in the context of an update to the comprehensive plan. We're past due on that. I think we should ask the planning board to either edit or redo the comprehensive plan. And I say that with great pleasure now that it's hard work, it's really hard work. And I think it gets at some of the things Phyllis first brought up. It's when we were first writing that comprehensive plan, a wise man once asked, what is the carrying capacity of this community? There's no easy answer to that question, but we see pinch points now at the Stone Pier, at Dennis, in the center, and we don't have an effective executive plan to deal with those pinch points that exist today, much less the pinch points that are going to exist in 10, 15, 20 years. Comprehensive plan is the best tool we have for getting at some of those things, but it's and then at an appropriate one, I'd like to make a motion.
Yeah. Well, you guys closed the Jason's all done. All right. Any other questions? All right, so now we'll move on to the next stage of this to take any necessary action. Bob?
With a note of thanks to Jason and his crew and to all of the members of the community who worked so hard to get us where we are now in this process, which is a ways down the road and a lot further still to go. I'd like to move that we approve the attached draft final alternative so that Wright Pierce can issue their final report, including this phase of it.
All right. Carol? All right, any discussion? All in favor? Yes. This concludes our meeting. Have a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Yeah.